Hello, welcome to the Daily Fantasy Flex podcast, the PGA edition. I am your host, Bryan. In this podcast, we're going to recap the Genesis Open, talk about the Honda Classic, the upcoming tournament for this week at PGA National Golf Club, and break down the DFS slate on DraftKings and FanDuel. As always, I'm joined by my co-host, Peter Jennings, aka CSU Ram, and Colin Davey. And we also have a special guest. We normally don't have guests, but excited to bring on Drew Stoltz, aka the Sleaze, and Pete. You guys are starting a podcast, so I'm going to kick to you and let you introduce Drew here.
Yeah, we got the mini tour legend himself, Drew Stoltz, with us, which is awesome.
Self-proclaimed.
He's a legend. I've seen him on the course. The guy is an all-timer. There's no doubt about it. We had him on a podcast last week. It was like Wilt Chamberlain in his 100-point game. We ended up taking it down because we're working on getting everything kind of refined. But within that podcast, he went 5-0 in his picks, and he had Bubba Watson to win. Colin can give credit to that. He was also on the pod. So that was quite the bang to come out with. And as good as that was, he's probably a better golfer at Whisper Rock than he is even on the picks. I'm rocking the Whisper Rock stuff today. I would say, his best place to gamble is definitely Whisper Rock. And you've won not one, not two, but 3 club titles at Whisper Rock, where John Rahm, Phil Mickelson, Ches Reavie, all these guys are members. So, Sleaze, how you doing, man?
Man, that is the most incredible introduction I've ever had in my life. If my wife would speak half as well about me as you do, I'd be in much better shape than I am now. But thanks for having me on. Look forward to breaking down some players this week, and hopefully can have a little success like we did last week.
Yeah, if we can have half the success that we had last week, that would be nice. Colin, we kind of had the man versus machine thing going. I would say your machine was humming pretty well last week, and you still got kind of stomped by the man. How are you doing, bud?
Short-term variance, week to week. It's a marathon, not a sprint, et cetera, et cetera. It has not changed my conviction to definitely not watch golf. But, we'll see. Maybe under the actual spotlight of scrutiny, and once it's in public, we'll see how it goes going forward. But it'll take a lot more to shake my faith in the machine going forward than just 1 week. All that being said, all props to Sleaze for pulling off the greatest game that no one ever saw.
Oh, my God. This is going to haunt me.
If someone goes 5-0, if a tree goes 5-0 in the woods, but no one sees it.
That's like a hole-in-one with no witnesses. Like, guys, I swear to God, it went in. It doesn't count. No one saw it, but trust me, it's all right. Just being 1-0 against the machine is more than enough for me.
Yeah.
All these little cliches.
I got a little gambling story, speaking of hole-in-one. So the first day I met Sleaze, we're playing a match with our buddies out at Whisper Rock. And, all my buddies and I, we do $5,000 hole-in-ones. And Sleaze, like a snake, is like, hey, can I get in on this action? And all of us, degenerates, like, yeah, sure, let's get Sleaze in there, no problem. And I believe it was 16 or 15. Is it 15 or 16, Ed, on the upper course?
It's 14 upper.
Oh, up. See, I'm way off. 14 upper. Sleaze freaking dimes this shot. Like, literally, it's over the flag the whole time. It lands an inch over the hole, like in the middle of the hole. And luckily, it didn't go in. But probably the worst bet I've ever made was getting Sleaze in the 5K hole-in-ones at Whisper. Have you had some hole-in-ones out there, bud?
I have one on that property. Yeah, so I have 5 in total, 1 out there. But it's been a while. It's been a few years. Mine have come in spurts. I had 3 in 1 year to the day, which was a while back, and then I had 2 in like a 10-day span a couple years ago. So I'm on an icy stretch, but yeah. Wow, I love the way you're building me up on this podcast. Jesus, I've never been talked about like this in my life. This is incredible. Keep going. I don't even want to talk.
Well, I'm just embarrassed because I can't even hit the freaking green, and I'm doing hole-in-one bets for $5,000 with Sleaze, who's freaking dropping down.
Yeah. As a professional gambler, you might want to tighten up a little bit on that type of stuff. That's a little loose.
Yeah, a little loose. But let's talk last week. So the one thing I'm curious for Sleaze's opinion is Bubba. We talked about it, how Bubba, the ball change was really big, and you had some insight just how important a ball change specifically for Bubba would be. Obviously, you weren't surprised since you picked him to win. But what did you see last week, and what do you expect about Bubba going forward?
Yeah, I think Bubba's a very emotional player, as you kind of see when he plays. And so when I start to see him playing well in the weeks like leading up, he's very much like a confidence guy. And what I saw in the weeks prior, like as we touched on in our other pod at Pebble, like he was playing well, made some uncharacteristic bogeys on par fives coming down the stretch there that kind of bumped him down that leaderboard a little lower than he should have been. But he's the kind of guy that, like, when he switched that ball, I think that just set him back a year and a half, because if there's one piece of equipment he couldn't change, it was his ball. And now I think he's getting back to hitting the shots that he's used to hitting, and he's very much just a confidence guy. And as I saw that trend improving over the weeks leading up to that, I just felt like he was a guy, especially given the odds that they were laying on him at 40-1 for a guy that's won out there 2 times. And starting to play well from what I've seen. I was like, this seems like a pretty good bet if you're looking at a guy that's kind of not one of the heavy favorites up top.
Yeah, the Volvic, I've played with some guys who play that ball. It sounds terrible off the club. Obviously, Bubba's moving the ball on every single shot. He shapes the ball as much as any player on tour. Going back to the Pro V1X is definitely big, and it's an even year, so I'm sure the Masters, he's going to be a popular pick. Colin, what did you think about last week, and what were your big takeaways?
So, sadly, our prediction came – well, the one prediction that did come true was neither of us won the dogleg or the club twirl. We did have a nice sweat because we were both leading 1-2 in the club twirl, so almost true that week. But my big thing, again, was feeding TJ the correct option, because you can pick any data point from this tournament and convince you're right. He finished 16th but was flirting with missing the cut at 40% ownership. That's basically what you hope to happen. I faded DJ completely and still came out ahead because I went all in on Justin Thomas, who basically was comparable to DJ, so it didn't hurt me per se. But I still go back and forth on whether or not DJ was a fade or not. And that just gets into game theory. Maybe there's something that just doesn't show up about how automatic someone is, that like maybe there's just no real risk to missing the cut, that someone's an auto play. But I still have to believe that DJ was a fade. Anytime anybody's above 40%, I don't think anybody is able to predict golf with that level of certainty. And especially when you're trying to play to win the tournament, you just have to be like, you have to get leverage. So,
well, I mean, like making the cut doesn't even matter for a guy like that, right? Like when a guy's like 45% owned in the most expensive golfer at like 12K, like it doesn't matter whether he makes the cut. You need a top 5, like just to be like competitive in GPPs, right?
Yeah. But if he misses the cut, you gain so much leverage if you fade him. I mean, that was huge. And yeah, he was 40% in like, most tournaments, in the high-end tournaments like the Thunderdome, the 5K buy-in, he was 70% owned again. The 1500, I think he was like 55% owned. So I think he was a clear fade at those ownership.
Yeah, I think you go on the cash, but I think he was a clear fade as well in tournaments. I mean, 45% is ridiculous.
Drew, do you have any insight on like these very high-end guys? The Spieths, the Dustin Johnsons. Like, obviously, they're huge favorites to make the cut in every event they tee it up, but is there anything specific about the high-end guys where you can point to something and say, hey, this might be a more volatile week, or hey, this is a week where you should just ride the stud no matter what?
Well, I mean, you guys talking about Dustin last week. Like, if there's ever one player that you're going to pick at one course and be willing to pay like that high top, premium price for a guy, it's hard to pick someone other than Dustin Johnson at Riviera. Like, that's the place where he's played. I mean, he never finishes, it seems like, out of the top 5 out there. So there are certain guys at certain courses where you just look at their track record and you're like, for whatever reason, this guy plays incredible at this spot. Like Tiger, in his heyday at Torrey or something like that. Like you'd be hard pressed not to pay whatever it costs to get Tiger Woods, because it's almost like clockwork if the guy would be in the top 5 or be there on Sunday. But for the most part, like it's so hard for like you see these top name guys, right? Justin Thomas, Rory, Dustin, these guys, and you expect these guys to go top 5, top 10, contend every week. It's just so hard out there to do that week in, week out, that it's like when you're paying these huge premiums, it's like other than maybe a couple guys here and there, you can't like bank on the fact that these guys are gonna be there every single week. Golf's just too volatile of a sport for that to happen. So I think it's worth taking a flyer on some of these other guys that maybe don't have quite the resume, but on any given week can beat these top guys. It's just too hard to be consistent that frequently. But that being said, Dustin at Riv is probably the one guy you would take in that situation.
Yeah, a lot of short-term variance in golf. I thought the interesting thing too, Cantlay, we were all super high on. He played really well. He fidgets more than anyone I've ever noticed, like, on the course. Did you know that about him, Drew? He's
a very like deliberate guy. Like there's no rush in his game. He's gonna go through his entire routine on every shot. He's not gonna vary from that in any way, regardless of the deal. Even when you watch him on like the range, like hitting balls, just practicing, where most guys will hit a ball, rake another one, flick it out there, rake another one, talk to their buddies. He's like rake a ball, go back behind it, go through the routine, walk up. Everything he does is like a process, it seems like, which is part of the reason probably why he's so good. But yeah, there's no hurry up offense with Cantlay. It seems like he's whereas Dustin, on the other hand, is like firing before guys' balls even stop rolling, which I personally love, but Patrick doesn't really fit that mold.
Yeah.
He's rivaling Ches Reavie love for you, Colin. You were pretty high on Cantlay. He's not quite in the Ches category, but obviously you were excited to see him play so well. He's another interesting ownership question before we move on. He was very heavily owned, but obviously incredible equity at that price. Do you feel confident he was a great play even with his high ownership?
Yeah, he's higher owned than I thought. And I go back and forth on what type of strategy he's okay for. So I think if you wanted to go like pure equity versus ownership, you could argue that someone like Jason Kokrak might give you a little bit more leverage, but it's just kind of an open question on, do you think that someone like truly has upside levels of like to win? And there are guys like Kokrak that keep coming up for like as much distance as they have, never seem to crack the top 25 as much as they should according to baseline expectations. And Cantlay just does seem to have that. I don't know whether or not it's like you truly can't make a good putt, whether or not you just crack it when you approach the top of the leaderboard. But I still think Cantlay was like pretty I just struggle to figure out who else had that essentially upside or top 25 chance at that price. So yeah. I can see it going either way. Subjectively, I'm probably just going to load up on Cantlay because
he's our guy.
Yeah, he's our guy.
I can't fade those guys that I just love, even with the ownership, like especially at the mid-tier, low-tier. And that's one thing I noticed last year, especially for the majors and big tournaments. I'd much rather eat the chalk and play the guys who are very high equity that are mispriced on the low end and try to be contrarian with like the studs. Like I thought that this, obviously this week I thought that made a lot of sense versus, trying to fade, the clear value and then see them play well and just be tilted with these other cute plays that are much tougher. I mean, the cheaper guys that are not chalk are cheap and not chalk for a reason. So I think that in general is a little bit better strategy.
Hey, Colin, if Patrick Cantlay and Ches Reavie were both drowning and you only had one life vest to throw them, which one would you throw it to? You can only save one.
Mine.
Or would you just kill yourself and throw yourself over and save them? You want to go down with them
I'd give them mine and say, save yourselves.
You couldn't throw yourself over and say, I can't live without you guys. I'm coming with you.
Yeah, I would donate myself as a human life raft and just hold my breath.
Yeah, all right, good. That's what I wanted. I just wanted to check on. See where the love meter was at.
That's the right answer.
That's right where I thought. Yeah, you said the right thing. Yeah. That's a no-win answer. I set you up. It's an old podcast trick I learned.
Welcome to the Kobayashi Maru golf podcast.
All right, well, let's dive into the Honda Classic. Good discussion on the Genesis last week. Honda Classic, we're down in Florida this week in Palm Beach Gardens. We're at the PGA National Golf Club, the Champion Course. This is one of the toughest courses on tour. The average golfer on DraftKings has scored about 11 to 12 points below expectations. So a lot of guys really struggle at this course. Colin, I'll kick to you first. I think my first question for you before we dive into like what specific golfer does well is that over the last couple of years, the last two specifically, this course has dealt with quite a bit of wind. So I'm curious, like when you're back testing your data, how are you dealing with that sort of specific issue? Does it make the data something that you might trust a little bit less?
So there is a way to account for it, and it's a little bit of kind of a subjective take. It's just you have to recognize what wind does. I've talked a lot about, and I've written a lot about wind before, and it's basically just introducing randomness all over the golf field or all over the course. And randomness always directionally hurts the favorite and helps the underdog. Because if it was a pure game of skill, like the favorites would win all the time. But if 1 out of 10 shots is basically determined by a roll of the dice or influenced by it, then that will always help the underdog, just because like you'd rather, like they want chance to have their, like in a head-to-head, like if I'm playing Tiger Woods or Dustin Johnson, I'd much like, the only way I can stand a chance is if like randomness like gives me a good swing rather than golf skill, because like it's just not a contest otherwise. So ideally you would be able to price it into results. Basically with something like course history, is when someone wins a tournament in past years, it doesn't count as much as far as predicting in future years, because you know they won in a random field, and so they were kind of like, it's not a true test of how well they do here. So like it probably does help to know that like in windy years, like someone's results are probably more due to randomness than, you know, true like skill or history at this course. So you kind of have to weight it accordingly. Now that's difficult to do in something like models where it's just simple aggregations and averages of the years past, but it is something to note when you're setting your weights in models. Like, you know, maybe if you did history before, just be aware of why guys are popping where, and don't be afraid to subjectively move them around, having that kind of win factor in the back of your head.
Yeah, that's a good point. You know, we've talked on this podcast over the last couple of years how to deal with wind. And I think our answer has been, you know, we want to take guys that avoid it if there's like a disparity where it's more windy, like earlier in the day, as opposed to later in the day. It does look like we might have to deal with a little bit of wind this week as well. Sleaze, I'll direct this question to you. Are there guys that are like better in the wind? Like what would you look like? What would you look for in a tournament where it's windy? Are you looking for guys with like lower ball flight, like apex heights, anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, there's absolutely guys that are good in the wind and guys that aren't good at the wind. I think, like speaking to Colin's point, where he was saying like wind throws a bit of randomness in there, and I think to an extent he's right. Like if the wind's blowing 30 miles an hour and it's a complete gong show, like that brings a lot of guys into the mix, right? All of a sudden, balls blowing around on greens. It becomes a bit of a shit show, and it's not necessarily based on skill. However, I think that if we see like the typical wins that you see at like a Honda Classic, like maybe 10 to 15 to 20, somewhere in there, I think what that does is eliminates a bunch of guys right off the bat. And I think it becomes more a game of skill, in that these guys that strike the ball, there's a huge difference between a ball that's well struck and a ball that's not well struck. And that difference is like magnified when the wind gets blowing 20 miles an hour, 15 miles an hour, like it does down there. And it just eats up these poor strikes, and the good strikers of the ball are able to pierce through it. So there's absolutely guys that are good in the wind and guys that are bad. Like if you look at like a Palm Springs tournament on the other hand, right? Like the Career Builder or whatever it's called now, they play in like a dome the whole entire week. And like you see any dude that you can think of has the potential to go play well on those type of courses. You'll see guys pop up that you don't see all year just because it's so – everyone's pretty good in a dome, right? You start throwing this wind blowing around, and on a course like this down at the Honda, I think it turns into just a ball striker's dream, because it just eliminates all these guys that can't hit it and like rely on kind of scrapping it up and down. That's why if you look through the past winners, like I was checking it out, every single dude that I could find is either a Florida resident or European or guys that play in the Southeast. Like
it seems the Euro guys have a nice edge.
Euro guys play well there. Yeah, and so I was back. The last West Coast guy I could find that won there was Fred Couples in 1993. And like, so there's a huge advantage just to playing this type of golf. Texas guys, Florida guys, huge advantage. So yeah, to answer your question, long-winded, but I think it shrinks the field in terms of who can win.
So Sleaze, I actually have to. This is actually kind of a thing we've gone back and forth on. You know, can you predict who's going to do well or better or worse in wind? And the stats guys in the golf community, myself included, have actually looked directly at this, and we found no correlation between if a guy plays like better or worse in high wind in the past, then it will happen in the future. So I kind of go back to the example of like, I'm sure you could also find like guys who have played well in the past when Mercury is in retrograde. If you want to take some nonsensical set, you can throw out like any nonsensical set.
I have no idea what you're talking. You got to dumb it down. You got to know your audience.
So yeah,
fewer syllables, please.
You can find
not in my arsenal.
You can find any random stat that like you can say like that correlates well. If some guy does well when this thing has occurred, or some guy but it's like spurious correlation, right? It's just statistical noise, because like, you know, like you could find a guy who does well when it's really hot in Beijing and they're playing in Florida, right? You will dig enough and you'll find a guy that matches that profile. But like intuitively, that has nothing to do with like, it's like there's no actual connection here. So like it's kind of like it's when you try to apply it in the future, it's just kind of noise. It's not predictive.
Well, I can tell you just from playing like it with guys that are from different parts of the country, like when I went to school, I played golf at TCU down in Texas. And when I went down there, we had some Texas natives that when the wind blew like 20, 25 miles an hour, they were hitting shots that I never hit before in my life, just 'cause I'd never played golf and that type of stuff before on this Bermuda grass. And I think there's absolutely, whether or not it shows up like in stats or what stat you're even looking for, like is it greens and reg when the wind blows 20 plus, or is it fairways hit when the wind blows 20 plus? I don't know where you go to find the stats that correlate exactly like when the wind blows. But, I mean, there's absolutely guys that know how to play in the wind, and there's absolutely guys that have no chance when the wind blows. And so I think it eliminates those guys that I was speaking of that don't play well in the wind.
Yeah, Colin, that's a good point. Maybe it's not like finding the guys that play well in the wind. It's like eliminating the guys that are just going to, like, really suck,
Some dudes just don't want to deal with it. Like, it's such a grind. It's like everything becomes more of a guess, everything. But, like, there's people that enjoy that and there's people that don't. And especially on this golf course, Honda, where it's just like there's no let up out there, some dudes would just be like, you know what, screw it. Like, I got friends in Scottsdale, play on tour, that would skip this week every year, both South Florida tournaments, just because they hate dealing with, like, the wind and the Bermuda and all that stuff. If they played well at all in the West Coast swing, they'd be like, you know what, I just don't want to deal with it. I'm not good at that kind of golf. I'm not even playing. And they would just shut it down and skip it. So
is that why I think you mentioned before that, in the past when we talked, like Q School was that's where you played. You folded like a tent in the wind, or what happened?
Oh, my God, dude. This place just spit me up and chewed me up and spit me out. This place is like the Buster Douglas to my Mike Tyson, if you will. It cut me down right in my prime. I went in there thinking I was unbeatable, and I just got put on the canvas quick. I was waving the white towel by about the second round, and I never got back up. This is where it went down. But like, to me, as a West Coast guy, this South Florida stuff is my least favorite golf like in the planet.
Why as a West Coast guy and like a great golfer, obviously, why is this place harder to play for you?
The grass is completely different for one. So if you grow up west of, like, say, Texas, you don't really see a whole lot of Bermuda grass, and you definitely don't see the type of Bermuda that they have down there in South Florida, like this really grainy stuff. So typically the closer you get to the ocean, like the grainier it becomes, right? Because the salt gets in there and stuff. And so, like, you could have a 10-footer going down grain that rolls like a 13 on the stimp or 14 even, and you can have this 10-footer going the opposite direction on a flat surface that rolls like a 7 or an 8, right? And the same could be said for putts that are breaking right to left or left to right. There's so much of an art to playing this grain and knowing the different type of shots to hit off of it. Like, that's why you see Tiger. Like, his short game has been incredible this year, right? Since when he got back at Torrey, he looked really good in the short game. He looked really good in L.A. chipping the ball. But when you saw him at his Hero Classic tournament down in the Bahamas on that grainy stuff, you saw him hit some shots that made him look like an idiot a little bit, like shots 5-6 yards off the green that he wasn't even hitting the green with. That's this grain, and when it gets into it, it just eliminates the margin for error, and it's so much different than anything we have out here that the only way you can get used to doing it is by playing in it a ton, and that's what all these Florida guys do. And so I never really played in it much growing up, and that's why every time I went down there, I struggled. It's just like reading the lies becomes so much of a factor. There's so many different shots you can hit, and it's just something I was never really that good at, and there's guys that are like complete artists when it comes to that stuff.
Yeah, that's a really good breakdown. And I know, looking at course history and stuff and talking with people, it's definitely a place you want to take these Euro guys and these Floridians. So I think that's some really good analysis, and it's helpful to get someone who's actually had experience playing this stuff.
Yeah, for sure. It's just looking at some specific stats, back-tested metrics to see how guys did over the last couple of years. The metrics that popped the most, bogey avoidance for sure. So that, I think, goes into the narrative that these grinders do really well. Colin, any last thoughts on the course?
This is kind of one of the weirder course fits if we're doing our classic, like which stats correlate well. Like it's a par 70, but it kind of seems like, I guess, a longish par 70. Like the best I can find is like maybe like a slight boost to distance, which is kind of counterintuitive. And then like weirdly it gets a penalty to GIR. that could very well be the wind factor you're talking about, Brian. You know, if it's been so windy here that like normally if you get your edge from GAR, that's not as predictive in a high randomness environment.
Yeah.
So like if you have a high GAR, you actually might be overrated because like it actually doesn't do anything for you because you're just subject to randomness. So I don't know. I think like this would honestly, but one thing we don't talk about enough, I think here is course fit fade. I know maybe we've talked about it briefly before, but if you think about it, like when everybody talks about what type of course this is, at least in DFS and week to week, you know, target accuracy guys, target bombers, whatever, but there's no kind of quantification of how much course fit hurts or helps everyone. And so I don't think from a game theory standpoint, it makes sense to load up on bombers where it gives them a mild edge versus something like Torrey Pines where it's like a must have. And so I think it could probably be like game theory optimal to fade course fit when everybody's going to load up on them just as much, when it doesn't actually help everybody's fit or game as much. So
that's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think this is with a weak course fit like this week. Like whatever everybody, like even if it's a consensus, maybe it'll be a consensus bomber course or each ball striker, I would probably fade the consensus just because there's just not a strong course fit this week.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Okay, let's get into the golfers here. We're going to go through a couple different tiers. We'll start off with the guys who are at the very, very top in the 10K plus range. Then we'll hit on some of the mid-tier guys in the 8 to 9K range, and then finish with value golfers. So we'll start at the top, headlined by Ricky Fowler. He's at 11.7 on DraftKings. He is the favorite to win with 11.1% implied odds. Rory is at 11.5. JT at 11.3. Sergio back in the field. He's been over in Europe and Australia the last couple months, back on the PGA Tour at 10.5, and then Alex Noren at 10.1. Sleaze, I'll kick to you first. Of those top guys, who was standing out to you this week?
Yeah, so I went back and forth with this a little bit. Obviously, I think Ricky as the most expensive pick makes sense. He's a local guy down there. He's one of these guys that plays in Florida, like we've talked about, that understands how to play that type of golf. And I think he makes sense completely as the top guy. But ultimately, I came down to bouncing back and forth between Justin Thomas and Sergio Garcia, and ended up going with JT. Just based on the fact that I haven't seen Sergio play in a whole lot lately. I think, or definitely not in the U.S. I don't think he has any tour starts since the PGA since the Tour Championship last year. And so I wanted to pick him, but just based on the fact that I don't think he's been playing many tournaments, there's no substitute for playing tournament golf. I went with JT. And he's been, like, I was looking at his stats, and it hasn't been a blockbuster year. Like last year, obviously, he came out and won back-to-back in Hawaii and had a huge, beginning of the season. He hasn't had quite that yet. He's still got a win, which is awesome. But the thing to notice about him is his consistency. Like he's 6 for 6 cuts made. Worst finish is T22. Like that's really, really good in the events that he's playing in, to almost have not finished outside the top 20 at all this year. He finished in the top 10 in LA last week. So he's obviously trending. And he's a guy that, like Ricky, lives down there, lives in Jupiter area, plays Bears Club, all this type of stuff that are very similar courses. And I think he's the guy for me to go with this week. Played bad there last year at Honda. Missed the cut, which was a little bit of a concern. But like I said, he had 2 wins. And his mind might not have been exactly on all the golf when he went back home that week. But he's my take this week. I think it's hard on that top tier, picking between those guys. I don't think there is a bad pick, really. But he's my guy.
Yeah, his history is interesting. Missed the cut last year, 3rd place in 2016, and then missed the cut in 2015. So been a little boomer bust, but I agree, trending. Love JT for sure. Pete, what are your thoughts on this top tier?
I love JT, man. I mean, that's been my guy last year, the big tournament with PGA Championship, won a bunch of money. JT was low owned. Last week, again, low owned. I wonder when people will start taking him more. Sets up extremely well on DraftKings. He is probably the best birdie maker if you go through the data over the last couple of years, especially last year on par 4s. So I just think the way he sets up is really, really nice, and I like the angle that he lives down there as well. I think the Euros are interesting. I mean, Noren, he hits a big cut, so I was going to ask Drew about that. Like, if it's going to be super windy, I know a cut can move a little bit more in the wind. His thoughts on that. I definitely like Sergio as well, and I don't think there's a bad pick outside of maybe Rory, just because I think Ricky has a lot more equity. But JT was going to be my guy, and specific to Drew here, what are your thoughts on Norn and playing a big fade at this course?
Yeah, typically I'm a big pro fade guy. I prefer the guys that hit the left to right over the right to left, just because I think it's more consistent and holds up under the gun better than a right to left. But in the breeze, it can be a tough thing to handle. Typically, guys that play left to right ball flight are going to have a lot more spin on their golf ball. So when you turn around and you're hitting directly into the wind, it just jumps your RPMs up crazy. And it can be hard to hit it far into the wind because you don't have these knuckleballs that are going through the wind like a draw would. And just with the increased spin on the ball, like your ball's going to move around more relative to a guy that moves it the other way. So I don't necessarily hate it or love it. Like, can you win with a fade in the wind? Yeah, absolutely you can. But I think when the wind comes up like this, I think you favor guys that can flight their ball differently. A guy that can hit a draw if he wants. A guy that can hit a fade if he wants. The best players I've ever played with in my life in the wind are guys that are constantly moving the ball against the wind. So if I have a hard right to left wind and it's a right-hander, they're hitting a big hammer fade into the wind, so the ball is net straight. If the wind's the other way, they're hitting a hard draw into it, so it nets straight, and the ball lands on the greens and stops, as opposed to if I'm hitting a hook into a hook wind, it's going to land on the green and spin left a lot. So I prefer the guys that can kind of move it both ways, which is why I think JT can do that, and I think he can flight it down when he needs to and stuff like that. But it's not
that's a really good call, because I've watched that with the wind with Patrick Reed, who's hitting a bunch of draws out there. When the wind, you see it on TV, when the wind's moving to the left and he's trying to hit these draws, it's a disaster, And,
that's the only way he shapes it. It just limits you. It handcuffs you. If you got a back right pin and a right to left wind and you hit a draw, how you get into it? You ain't. You're not. A guy that can sit up there and just slam a slice. Take an extra club or two extra clubs, go from a 7 to a 6 or a 5, and just hammer a fade in there and hit a net straight shot. He can get to that, whereas a guy that can only hit it one way can't. So.
Yeah, that gets into your point of you can just eliminate some guys this week.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
totally.
Colin, what are your thoughts on this top tier? And I'm curious who you think is going to be the most popular.
I'm in pretty broad agreement with everyone here. I think at the top, there's a large gap between Ricky and JT's equity versus everyone else in the top tier. And I think mostly who I'll load up on depends entirely on if it comes down to ownership. Ricky's always popular. I think people are going to look at his history and I would probably guess he's going to be the most popular. And that'll directly eat into JT's ownership, who I could actually see a little bit, to Pete's point, just a little bit of a birdie maker, kind of has a little bit more upside, kind of top 25 potential. But I don't hate either. It'll really come down to who gets more buzz, and then pick the opposite person for me. Sleeves, I agree with you that Sergio is an interesting case because all the stuff is done in Europe. And I think that's where I think data comes in really useful. And the more you can kind of translate the European results into what does that translate over here? We're not a fan of middling Euro results here that might as well be missing the cut at tour level. And kind of going down the list, 19th in Hong Kong, 24th in Australia, 32nd in Dubai. Those are not inspiring results at all. And yeah, I get that there's kind of some decent history to maybe counterweight that here. But Sergio has come in hotter in other years, when he stormed into Jupiter and, had good results. I just don't like those Euro results as inspiring anything particularly great. I can see a lot of, especially I can see a lot of people fixating on his he's never missed the cut here in forever. He's a pretty clear fade for me. And Rory just kind of I really want to wait until he shows a lot more that justifies price tag. I think his price tag is coasting on his name, reputation, and not anything he's actually done.
Fair. All right, let's dive into the mid tier here. Let's go guys in the 8 to 9K range. Pete, I'll kick to you first. A bunch of interesting players here. Gary Woodland is at the top, but then we have Hatton and Fleetwood. So we have some Euro guys in this range that could be interesting. 8, 9K, who's standing out to you?
There's a bunch of guys that I think are really interesting in this range. If we start on the low end, one guy who's polarizing to me that makes me kind of sick to get behind is Martin Keimer. Has really good history here, is actually starting to play pretty well. He's getting some buzz already, so if he gets buzz, I'll fade him happily. I don't really like playing him, but he's intriguing on the low end. Definitely fading Tiger. Another guy, if you're going to look at course history and someone who just seems to play extremely well down at this course, is Jason Duffner. I'm intrigued by him, but we'll probably pay a couple $100 extra to Daniel Berger, who I really like. I think Berger, for his talent, upside, obviously a Florida guy, makes a ton of sense. I'm really high on him. And then I like the Euros. I really like Hatton. I really like Fleetwood. I mean, I think Fleetwood is clearly a big name on the rise. My dad has become an avid golf watcher. Fleetwood and Charlie Hoffman are his two favorite guys, so I'm a little biased towards Fleetwood because I know it makes my dad happy. But I like these Euro guys, and I think Fleetwood's really trending in the right direction. And Hatton is the opposite of Sergio. He's been crushing the Euro Tour, and obviously we want to take Europeans here. So I think this range is pretty awesome. I have no problem fading the top end altogether and starting lineups with like Hatton and Fleetwood and Berger or something like that. I think there's a ton of value kind of in this range.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Colin, what are your thoughts on that strategy and guys that are standing out to you?
I honestly like it a lot less than Pete does for a couple different reasons. And like this, at least like I should say the data likes it a lot less. And I'll kind of narrate like what's going on here. Fleetwood, I could see for like, I guess I'll start with Fleetwood. I think he's probably like the best pure equity of like anyone in this group. I'm very worried about his ownership, though. I think everyone will be onto that. Like, I definitely see it north of 20% this week, so that kind of limits its utility in GPPs. The guys you mentioned, I kind of have individual nitpicky cases for all of them. So, like Daniel Berger, like I looked at, so like I don't know what to make as a result. Like Sleeves, like I'm hoping you can help me out here. It was a disastrous, like 38% GAR with like otherwise good driving, like by proxy.
Last week?
Last week was a disaster. I know.
He was so bad.
Yeah. Just like it was a disastrous ball.
What a bomb.
So your GAR is that low, your driving is okay. That's like when I hit my irons. Apparently, it's just like you can't find a green.
Slightly different.
Slightly different, yeah. But just from stats alone, like, I mean, I didn't watch any of it, but like that just like what is going on there? Like when you have such an outliery performance like that, like, is it a one-off? Is it like, can you write it off? Is it a forebearer of things to come? What the hell is going on with such a goose egg like that?
Yeah, I didn't get to see Berger play, obviously, any last week, but I'll say this about him. He's the kind of guy that if you've seen him swing the golf club, it's not like a textbook move. It's not a guy that was built in a lab with all these teachers like you see Jason Day or Adam Scott or something. It just looks perfect when you put it up on TV. He's got very much like a homemade swing. He's got a really strong left hand, plays with a super shut club face. It gets laid off, and it's very homemade. And I love it for that reason because I think he knows he can control his ball better than a lot of these guys that rely more on technique. But in saying that, there's a lot more variables in his golf swing than there are in, say, like an Adam Scott. Or I keep throwing him out because I think he probably has like the textbook swing when people think about golf swings. But there's a lot more variables in that golf swing and a lot more probably like timing-based things, which is why I think when you see him clicking, you'll see him click for a number of weeks in a row maybe when everything's going. And then when things are off, you might see some of these like bad performances like you saw at Riv when things just aren't right and it's not all kind of synced up correctly. So that would be just off the top of my head kind of what I think would be going on with a Berger like that. He's got a high ceiling when he's going, he can really go, but his bad golf is probably worse than like the bad golf of a Spieth or a Tom, or some of these or even guys like in his price range. His bad is probably is worse than their bad. Would be my guess.
Comes from a tennis family. Dad's a huge tennis player. Obviously a really good athlete. And I that was one thing I should have brought up. I am a little concerned about that, but I also think that'll bring down his ownership. So I just like the upside. I mean,
I like that play there. He's a fighter too. Like he's as competitive as a guy as there is. Like we heard him at the President's Cup this year when we like mathematically had an opportunity to close out the international squad the day before the last day. Like mathematically it could have been over going into the last day, and they interviewed him about it, and he's like, I hope we win every match and this thing's over like before tomorrow. Like he wants to beat people. So I think him coming off a bad week might even be good for you.
Good call. Sleaze, I'll kick right back to you. The other guys have given their thoughts on some guys in this range. What are your thoughts, guys that are sticking out to you?
Yeah, I picked two guys sub 9,000, and to me, these guys have a very similar golf game. These are two guys that I've gotten a chance to play with, and I'm very impressed with their game. First one being Brian Harmon. He goes off at 8,900. First reason I like him is he's a Sea Island resident. He's a Georgia grad. He plays in the Bermuda. He's used to playing in that type of golf, and he's had a great start to 2018, but he's probably a little bit under the radar. He's 13th in the FedEx Cup. He's had 6 consecutive top 10s to start the season, one of those being a 2-man event, so throw that out if you want and call it 5. But he's not the longest driver in the world, but he's about 290 off the tee, but he's super accurate. He's 9th in driving, and he's 4th in greens and reg. And this is a guy, speaking to what I was saying before, who can move the ball both directions, can flight it down, can do a lot of stuff. And so when I was going back and just looking at his results from this year, I looked at other courses with like similar that I feel like would probably play similar to this. He finished 4th at Sea Island, which is another like Bermuda, windy kind of ocean, breeze type course. 3rd at the Tournament of Champions in Hawaii. Same could be said for that. And 4th at the Sony Open. So like he's played really well in these type of conditions, or in courses that are more similar to, what we're going to see this week than not. So I liked him for that reason. And my other guy, a lot of the stuff parallels with these two guys, but I got Kevin Kisner, 8,500. He has not had his best year this year, but most of it from what I see, he hasn't been hitting it as well as he has. And this guy, from playing with him, he is one of the best ball strikers around. He's so solid, the ball coming off of this. He's been great putting so far, hasn't hit it great, but like I think he had a week off this last week. Oh, he missed the cut at Pebble, went home, and I think he'll, with that time off, get it right. I look for this kid to come out. Same type of thing as I was saying about Berger. Both these guys are competitors, and I think that having Kisner coming off a miscut too, I like that too. So both those guys around the $8,500 mark, those are my guys in that price range.
Yeah, those are good ownership plays for sure. Mm-hmm. And one other Euro guy that I think is going to get a lot of love around the industry that I'm curious you guys' opinion on is Rafa Cabrera-Bello. I think he's another guy that will end up being pretty chalk in this range. Probably the highest owned guy, actually. Colin, do you have an opinion on him?
I mean, yeah, I agree that he's going to be chalk for sure. I think people are almost irrationally in love with him. I mean, like he's so like top 20. I mean, like top 30 finishes are like nothing to sniff at. They're good, but he's kind of one of those other guys that like when there's like a backlog of Euro results, like it dilutes your kind of overall level and like not properly accounting for field strength. I think like causes people to fall in love with just like raw gaudy numbers a little bit more. And like just combine that with high ownership, like I can't really find a compelling reason to play him. Sleeves, really quick, going back to your Harmon pick, I guess I have the same question on Berger. So like I like numbers loved Harmon like to the start of the year, and it was basically one round at Torrey Pines where he couldn't do apparently anything right. Poor distance, poor GAR, poor everything that have just kind of tanked his outlook. Is there kind of something similar where like Harmon's bad golf is similar to Berger's bad golf, or like because everything out there just seems like it almost looks like a proxy for injury when you just can't do anything that right well for a single tournament. I just don't know.
Yeah, I'm not aware of any injury to that, but this is what I would say to that. Some of these things that like show up in the stats that if you kind of see it in person might speak a little bit differently. I don't have his schedule in front of me right now, but I know he won last year. So he played the Tournament of Champions. He played the Sony Open. He played the Career Builder in Palm Springs. And then after that, he was probably going to Torrey to play. So he was probably on his 4th week in a row of playing. A lot of travel from Georgia to Hawaii, a couple weeks in Hawaii to California, been on the road a long way. Sometimes if these guys are like worn out and they know let's say they play a bad Thursday and they know they're going to miss the cut and they're kind of just over it and just want to go home and get a breather, like there's a chance that their effort level on a Friday or something like that isn't as high as it might be if they're actually like grinding to make the cut and things like that. So like you see guys that occasionally shoot these big numbers on like a Friday, and I almost put it as like, I don't want to say they're throwing in the towel, you know what I mean? But they're kind of over it and like, hey, dude, this is my 4th week in a row. I've already had some great weeks. I've made a boatload of money. Why don't I just go home and hang out? And, if they slap it around for, 12, 18 holes or whatever, they don't care. But the stats probably read into like, oh, my God, this guy's lost it. So barring an injury with Harmon, I would not say his bad golf is bad. I think this kid's rock solid, and I love his golf game.
Yeah, I like that call. I know, Colin, you're just on mute, but, I think that's something that definitely weighs in these guys. And I think it applies to Justin Thomas last year at this tournament. When you're on a groove and you're playing every single week and you make a bunch of money, like, you're just primed for a kind of a letdown spot. That's, normal kind of human nature. And I think it's something to definitely be cognizant of. And for Harman, I mean, he started off the year as high as he possibly could. And that definitely makes sense to me.
Yeah, I think burnout is like, it's been on my mind a lot as far as like it has to be real for like a lot of these guys. And like it's almost counterintuitive to stats, because if someone's playing really well like now, for how much we harp on recent form, you consider they're going to continue to be playing well. But they are human beings, they're not machines. They need, like, I'm sure guys do get sick of it or just like don't bring the same motivation. And pinpointing exactly when that happens is probably like, that's something where it helps to be around the game to know who's susceptible to that, like going into this week. I thought that, like, just kind of like checking the progression of last week, I thought that might have happened to Ches, where like he just had such like a third and fourth round collapse. He's played so much and so well and come so close to winning. Like, I know there's kind of a burnout narrative like going into the tournament. Like, this dude needs a break. That has to be exhausting coming so close, like for 5 to 6 last 6 weeks. Do you think that's a plausible explanation for like what happened to him in third and fourth round, where he just kind of like, all right, like just like collapsed kind of?
I think the physical toll of playing that many weeks in a row is a lot. It's more than guys think. Like, oh, you're flying around and playing golf, but it's really real. The travel drains you out. But B, the amount of energy you burn when you're like in the hunt and contending, the way Ches has been the last few weeks, is like exponential compared to a guy that's out there on the back, playing the teed off on the back 9 and is finishing 42nd. And stuff like that. Yeah, they're both playing 72 holes, but the amount of energy like a guy in the lead or near the lead is using is 10x what other guys are using. And I think for Ches, maybe like I think just playing a ton of weeks in a row, and B, when you've been that close to winning and that much in the hunt, as he has been, and then maybe at LA he plays a few bad holes and he drops down a little bit. I think maybe your concentration level dwindles like a little bit, knowing like, hey, this is my last week. All right, it's the first time I haven't been in contention in 3 weeks. Like you're just not probably as dialed in mentally as you would be, in those other weeks. So, I mean, there's so much that goes on that probably like the stats freak out over it. Whereas as a player, you see it and you're like, it's not that big a deal. Like I've played with guys on Friday afternoons that are going to miss the cut that literally just like will start knocking 6-footers around, until they make it, because they're just over it and want to get done and get out of people's way. And, it doesn't mean they're an awful putter or anything like that. It's just they're kind of done, Mm-hmm. And so that I think that might be what happened with Harman's case. I haven't checked it out, but there's oftentimes things behind the scenes that may speak contrary to the stats.
Yeah, I love that subjective angle. I've heard it from a ton of golfers. Like, you don't want to take the guy, especially if it's not like a premier guy who's coming off a win. Like, someone just has like a big time win for them. They've had to exhaust so much energy on that Sunday, they almost always collapse the next week. And I think you can apply that same thing to guys who have been in the hunt for like 3 or 4 weeks in a row. Like, there's obviously going to be a letdown. So I think that's something that makes a lot of sense. And golf is a really, really interesting sport to try to predict, because there's data and then there's the subjectivity stuff. And there's obviously a lot of short-term variance. So trying to kind of blend the art and science is definitely something we're all trying to do.
Yep. A lot of great stats in golf, but it's also, anyone who's played knows that it's maybe the most mental sport in the world. So hard to blend those, as Pete just mentioned. I will say, I don't want to get into this because you guys are going to on your podcast, but there's a matchup, Harman versus Reed. That sounds like one that you guys might need to discuss on the pod.
Georgia Bulldog matchup.
Yeah.
Couple of dogs.
That's going to be a good one.
Cannibalism. Yeah, that will be a good one.
Yeah. All right, let's dive into this lower range. Colin, I'll kick to you first. This guy's in the 6K range. Value plays. Who's standing out to you?
All right. Value play. Who do I like so far? I think it probably starts like, as it does most week with Charles Howell is kind of like a no-brainer here. He's going to be he's just a cash game lock. His ownership is going to be
he's going to be chalk. Yeah,
guys that like makes the cut all the time, doesn't really have I mean, like he's fine here. He's a known quantity. Like Chucky 3 sticks gonna Chucky 3 sticks, so like you know what he's kind of gonna do. There are some other names that like I don't quite know what to do with. One of them that I don't mind is Russell Henley, who I seem to be on every single year. Just can't move his price up. Puts up good numbers to boot. Like the couple times he misses the cut, it's by a stroke. Like I think he's just kind of an all-purpose undervalued here and has like good history here to boot. And then there are other guys that I'm like not happy that they're popping. Guys like Luke List and Jamie Lovemark. The prototype, I mean, List is the guy who can vomit a country mile, but probably can't putt to save his life. Jamie Lovemark is the Jamie Lovemark experience, where you can literally it's a chaos golfer. You can get any conceivable performances on the table.
His history is about as bad as like anyone's history at any golf course.
Yes, absolutely. So like it's a question of how much will that hurt you here and how much can you get away with it. I don't know. I'm just never comfortable loading up entirely on someone like Lovemark where it's just pure chaos, but the chaos does tend to keep his ownership low. And so I don't mind him. I don't mind having him like occupy a decent chunk of the exposure just because it's going to be low owned. I just think it would be a little bit too much of a volatile ride to go all in on him. But I don't mind taking him here for sure. So guys like that, like I don't know. What do you guys think?
Please destroy that one. I know you want.
Yeah, I'll speaking on the Lovemark pick, he would be a guy that I would stayed away from in that price range for a reason. I know he lives in Florida now down there, so he is familiar with the golf, which we've said plays a big role here. But in playing with him in the past, and I'm sure there's he's improved upon this, but he is one of the highest ball hitters that I've ever played with, which is one of his huge advantages, right? Which makes him great at a lot of places. He can get to pins that guys can't get to. He can hit a 5-iron higher than I can hit an 8-iron. And land it softer, and that's a huge factor. But if the wind blows at Honda, like I think it might, and this might be worth looking at, like the weather, the weather forecast to see if the wind is expected to blow. If it's going to blow,
it is, yeah.
It is supposed to blow.
Yeah.
All right, well then that'd be a guy I would stay away from, just because he hits the ball so high, and it's really, really hard to control your ball consistently hitting it that high the way he does. Which is why, speaking like going back a bit of the ways, why Sergio has been so good here. You guys have said he's never missed the cut. He's been fantastic, and the only reason like I didn't take him is because he hasn't been playing much or whatever. He is a guy that can hit it like he could hit it, underneath a desk from 20 yards away. Like he can flight the ball any single way he wants, and that's why he's so good there. Left to right, right to left. He can do all this stuff. Where Jamie is more just like a high, straight, long guy that I don't think fits well at a place like he'd be a guy you'd want like a U.S. Open or something like that. Versus like a Honda would be more like that's why the Euros play well there too. You spoke on why the Euros play well. It's because they play in 20-mile-an-hour wind every tournament. Americans don't, other than the Florida guys. So these guys that can knock it down and hit different shots have huge legs up on guys that are just like long, straight guys, which is what I think Jamie is. So that would be my take on Jamie.
I like it. Pete, who's standing out to you in this range?
All right, so the most polarizing guy that I'm trying to figure out what to do with is Adam Scott. We talked about him last week. Drew, Colin, and I did, and his motivation is certainly a concern. But he didn't play badly last week. He didn't play well. I think he finished 53rd. It was just kind of solid, shooting around par every day. Obviously not great, but he has amazing history here. So that's one guy that I think will end up being more popular than he probably should, so I'll probably fade him. But he's someone I'm curious, Drew's opinion for sure. I like some of these Euros. I mean, you got all the guys like Wiesper, Peters, Emiliano Grillo that are standing out a little bit to me. Definitely on the Chucky 3 sticks in terms of cash games. I think he makes sense. But, yeah, it's a tougher range. I don't have as much conviction as I did last week on some of these plays. You have a lot of West Coast guys that I'm excited to play later on, like a Ryan Palmer. Probably won't play him here. I think he's starting to kind of turn it around. So it's tough to kind of pinpoint guys that I really like. Patton Gazire might be a guy that is interesting. He's really cheap for how well he's played this year. I think he is leading the FedEx Cup right now. So he's another guy that I'm kind of looking at. Strictly on course history, Camilo Vegas has done really well here. I don't know about the balls to play him, but this is definitely the tier of golfers where I'm struggling the most, because there's a lot of guys who have played really well that have bad form right now, and there's other guys who have good current form who played poorly down here, who aren't Floridians or Europeans. So, Sleaze, please help me, because I'm struggling with this range.
Yeah, your take on Adam Scott, I think he's just more of a question mark still. I think it was for him, like, he's a guy that if he plays more and we can just see him out there playing 4 rounds more frequently, like, he's a guy that would make perfect sense here. You know, he can hit it any way he wants, and I think the only thing keeping, at least like me, from taking him is just a little uncertainty. You haven't seen him enough yet, so I stayed away from him. Not that he is the exact type of player that could go out and play well there. This course suits him great. But I got 3 guys around the 7,500 mark that I like, and I'll give them to you quickly and why. So the first one, Ryan Palmer. Doesn't have the greatest track record at the Honda, 26th and 16, 37th last year. But the thing that I saw last year, he was in the 36-hole lead after Friday. Like, he was leading the tournament and fell off on the weekend. So obviously his good golf translates well at Honda. And this dude's just an incredible driver of the ball and ball striker. He's a Texas guy. He can flight the ball down. He doesn't necessarily move the ball like a direction. The one thing that's a little bit that would be negative with him is it's predominantly like a right to left guy. Doesn't really fade the ball a whole lot. But he hits it so solid, and he tends to play well in places in the wind that I like him. He lost in a playoff earlier at Torrey, so he's trending. I think he's back on the right track. He was my first guy. Second guy, Keegan Bradley, going off at 7,700. Solid 2018, 26 in the FedEx Cup, 5 of 7 cuts made, lives in Jupiter, plays at Bears Club, good ball striker, putting probably a little dicey, but he's 15th greens in reg, and he hits his irons really well, 10th in strokes gained approach to green. Hits it a long ways too. He's the type of guy that has definitely the type of game to win. And my last guy, and this is a sneak dude, and maybe he's not a sneak in like the fantasy world, but a guy that's just been nails for like the last 10 months or so, ever since last year on the web.com, is Chesson Hadley. 15th in the FedEx Cup.
Oh, yeah.
Do you like him? You on him too?
Oh, I love Chesson this week, yeah.
Okay, I don't know like what the stats like say, all the numbers and stuff like that, but he probably doesn't get enough props in the golf world for ever having played as well as he's played this year. 9 of 9 cuts, 4 top 5s. I have not played with Chesson, but I know that since he won on the web last year, he got a win that basically assured him his PGA Tour card for this year. He's been like unbelievable in everything he's played in, contending in all the webs. Played incredible this year in the FedEx Cup. He's a North Carolina guy. I think he lives in Raleigh. So Bermuda's not unfamiliar to him. I actually think he won on the PGA Tour in Puerto Rico, if I recall. A couple years ago, he won and then lost his card after the 2-year exemption. But so he plays well in these Bermuda type places, and I just think he's under the radar dude. So I got him at 7,700. If the wind doesn't blow him away, he's about 6'4", $155 maybe. I think he's a solid pick at that price.
Yep.
So those are my dudes.
I love the Chesson call. If you're looking at bogey avoidance, which I am waiting a little bit this week, he's one of the best in the field at that. So like the call for sure. One guy I do want to talk about who's popping a little bit in my model is Sam Burns. I mean, this is a really young guy, turned pro just a couple months ago out of LSU. Pete, I know you try to keep up with the younger guys. Any thoughts on him and maybe some young guys that you might want to look at through the rest of the year?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I was going to bring up Aaron Wise as well. I know that's someone Colin's been touting quite a bit this year as a good young player. Definitely trying to keep up on him. One guy who's kind of been interesting this year that I've seen a lot of love in the DFS community has been DeChambeau. I think, Sleaze, you hate DeChambeau, right?
I'm not a science guy. Like, I don't love turning an art into science. Like, you know what I mean? I think there's too much hype around this whole thing. He's a great player, don't get me wrong, and from everything I've heard, he hits it really well, and his game is dialed. I just think he plays slow. I hate slow play.
He's a machine, and you're the man. I mean, that's how it goes.
Exactly. Yeah? We're like opposite. We're like oil and water. Like we're never gonna be a line. I don't know. I feel like
the shocking thing is Colin didn't like DeChambeau.
You guys are like one and the same, bro. It's be like looking in the mirror. You gotta love that machine. Just eliminate all variability and just.
Yeah, you think so? Like Pete and I actually, you'd think that like I would love a guy like DeChambeau who's just trying to science all the golf game, but like I think they're like I've also seen it enough times where science gets overhyped for science's sake itself, and like just because you're sciencing it doesn't mean that it's good science. So like I think that they're at least like in the stats world, there's just such a premium place on doing something different for the sake of doing something different. And like that usually it makes it overrated in a bunch of cases in my mind. So like for whatever he's doing with all the stuff he's doing, like making irons all the same length, like it's great that he has an analytical approach, but like just like a lot of people assume that like, oh, doing something is different is correct for its own sake. And like, no, like you kind of like there is a reason that, the status quo persists. So it's not always the correct answer to disrupt something for the sake of disruption.
Yeah, we'll get out on one last question before we pick winners. Sleaze, is there any young guns that you're really high on this year? It doesn't have to be for this week, but like you're pretty tuned into guys up and coming on the tour. Obviously, you spend a lot of time on a variety of different tours. Are there young guys that you're pretty high on for 2018?
Yeah, there's a couple of them. You touched on one of them already, Aaron Wise. I think he's got a huge game. I haven't been around him personally. However, a close friend of mine was the assistant golf coach at Oregon the past few years, and this is a guy that's a hell of a player. And he's a guy that is not quick to give out compliments in terms of other people's golf games. He'll be like, he'll see, oh, that guy's trash. Oh, he can't hit it. He'll never make it and all this stuff. And he like beams when he talks about Aaron Wise. Like, this kid's got it. He's got every tool. As soon as he figures it out, he's going to be dangerous. And so I think Aaron Wise and I think Bo Hostler is another kid that's a win sooner rather than later. Both of those guys are rooks that I expect one, if not both of them, to pick off a dub this year. I don't know if it'll be Honda or where it'll be. There's a certain element of just getting comfortable being on the PGA Tour that I think they got to both go through. But those are two guys that have big games as young kids. And I also really like this Australian Cameron Smith. His game's nice, and he's played well for a young kid, and he's held up. Like, I think he played really well at Riv last week. He's been solid. So those are three guys. If I had to name sub 23-year-olds that I'm high on.
Yeah, like that call. Cam Smith definitely came through last week for us. Brian, any final thoughts before I pick winners?
No, let's do it.
Right, let's let Sleaze pick the winner first, since
okay.
he's the guest on the podcast.
Oh man, I didn't even have a winner picked out. Why don't y'all go through? Let me think about this a second. I didn't have one lined up here. I got to
don't worry about to win odds. You can pick anyone. If you had to pick anyone, your life depends on it. This week, who you got as your winner. Doesn't matter on their odds. Doesn't matter on anything. You just get to pick a winner.
All right, I'll go with JT then. I got him as my top guy in the blue chip category. If I were to take one of those guys, he would be my guy. If Sergio had played more, I would take him. I wouldn't rule him out, but I think there's a little too much rust. I like where JT, where his game's at. I'll roll with JT if I'm picking a winner.
Okay. I don't care where I go.
Colin, you want to go second? I'll go third. Pete, you can round it out.
Sure. I guess I'll take Ricky, the other option. Kind of boring, but
chalk.
Yeah.
I also like the Warriors to win the NBA championship this year too. And I like Brazil's soccer team to be pretty good, and Roger Federer is going to win some tennis tournaments.
Great analysis. Yeah. I guess I got to go Rory here.
All right, I'll take Sergio then. And so the next guy is you get to pick someone under 9K Sleaze, so you'll get to go last. Just can't pick anyone that we've already taken. I'll leave Sleaze's guy. I'll take – let's see here.
Is this a guy to win who's under 9K?
Yeah.
Right.
I know. I mean, I definitely would take Harmon, but I'm going to save him for you.
We'll see if he gets around.
Well, yeah, Sleaze as the guest gets Harmon, okay? We all know.
I got a different guy. Go ahead.
Okay. All right, then I'll take Harmon.
It's a good pick. It's an astute pick, Pete. You're a smart kid.
Yeah.
All right. I'm going to go Berger then.
I'll dip below, go by the stats, and give me Henley.
Previous champion, very good pick as well. I will go with the other Bulldog, Kevin Kisner. Coming off the MC.
Perfect.
Also hard.
Awesome. Well, Awesome. Well, a great pod. Thank you guys for listening. Pete, why don't you tease your upcoming pod and then close us out?
Yeah, we'll have an upcoming pod on the Action Network with Drew and Colin. The big thing we're ironing out still is the name. But, yeah, you can check out Sleaze on Twitter at Drew_Stoltz. He's a hilarious guy, and hopefully we'll have some contests down the road potentially to play golf with Sleaze. If anyone ever beats Sleaze, I'll give him a lot of money. I'll be back in Sleaze any chance I get.
Way overhyping my golf. People beat the hell out of me on a daily basis. So,
dude, buddy, us fantasy nerds, we're freaking 10 handicaps. 15
that's a good point. I can handle Colin. I'm confident in that.
Yeah. I'm confident you can handle it too. Yeah.
Yeah, we're in big trouble. We're data nerds, but yeah, it's been fun having you on, and we'll have a lot of content coming with Sleaze. Thanks so much for coming on, Drew.
I had a blast, boys. Looking forward to see how this goes, but thanks for having me.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you everyone for listening. Good luck this week in the Honda Classic, and we will talk to you guys next week.